Okay, so in this lesson we're going to continue solving linear equations. In particular, for many of these problems in part 1, we're going to have parentheses involved, so we're going to use the distributive property to remove the parentheses. Alright, so the first thing you want to do when solving a linear equation is, if there are any fractions, you want to clear the fractions. So in this case, there aren't any. Then the second thing you want to do is, if you have any parentheses, you want to use distributive property. So we do. So I'm going to distribute everything that's inside the parentheses. Remember, this means negative 3 times 2x minus 5. So everything inside the parentheses has to be multiplied by negative 3. Alright, so we can just distribute this negative 3. So negative 3 times 2x is a negative 6x. Negative 3 times a negative 5 is a positive 15. And then I'm just rewrite everything else. Alright, so that's what we have. So again, what I did here was I used distributive property. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do, once you use distributive property, the next thing you want to do is combine like terms. And so I have a negative 6x and a positive 1x. Remember, there's no coefficient there, it's understood to be a 1. Or if you don't see it, it's understood to be 1 because there is a coefficient, it's 1. So a negative 6x and a positive 1x is a negative 5x. Alright, so I'm going to have negative 5x plus 15 equals a negative 3. Alright, so once you use distributive property, most of the time, it's not always going to be always, but most of the time you're going to combine like terms. So what we did here was combine like terms. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, if you notice, there's only one term that has a variable, and it's on the left-hand side. And I have two constants, and they're on both sides of the equation. So remember, you always want to get rid of the coefficient of the variable x last. So you're going to do the multiplication property of equality at the end. So what you want to do first is, or next, is get rid of this plus 15. So right now I'm adding 15. The opposite is to subtract 15. So I'm going to subtract 15 from both sides. Now what allows you to subtract 15 from both sides is the addition property of equality. So the addition property of equality. Alright, and then you're going to combine like terms again. Alright, so when I combine like terms, I get a positive 15 and negative 15. Those are opposites. So when I add two numbers that are additive inverses of each other, their sum is 0. So you get negative 5x plus 0 is negative 5x equal. And a negative 3 and a negative 15 is a negative 18. Alright, and then finally we're going to get x by itself. And to get x by itself, right now you're multiplying x by negative 5. The opposite of multiplication is division. So to get a 1 here, you want a coefficient of 1. To get a 1 there, you're going to have to divide both sides by negative 15. Because a negative 5 divided by negative 5 is a positive 1. 1 times x is x, which is what you wanted to obtain by itself. And a negative divided by negative is a positive, and I cannot reduce 18 fifths, so just leave it as 18 fifths. Alright, so what allowed us to do that, to go this little part here where we divided by negative 5, that's a multiplication property of equality. Alright, and then what I did to go from here to here was I just simplified. Simplify, reduce. Okay, so that's your solution. So your solution is negative 18 fifths. So notice that when I went from one step to another, I was writing equivalent equations. So all these equations are equivalent. So this equation is equivalent to this equation is equivalent to this equation. So all these equations, the solution is going to be 18 fifths. So that's the solution to the original problem. All right, number 2. All right, so number 2, let's suppose we had let's say negative 6y minus 3 plus y equal negative 8 minus 2y plus, let's say 5. All right. And so notice in this case there are no parentheses, there are no fractions, but you do want to see if you can combine like terms first. All right. And so I can, because a negative 6y and a positive y is a negative 5y. And over here, I'm left with negative 3 equal. And over here, I can combine the constants, a negative 8 and a positive 5, is a negative 3. So I get negative 3 minus 2y, or you can write it as negative 2y minus 3. It does not matter. Okay, so notice I have variables on both sides, constants on both sides as well. So let's just bring the variables to the left-hand side. So let's deal with the variables first. So I'm going to use the addition property of equality now. So right now I'm subtracting 2y. The opposite is to add 2y. So I'm adding 2y to both sides. What I do to one side, I do to the other. I only do it once. Okay, so, and then remember that's the addition property of equality. All right, now I'm going to combine like terms. A negative 5y and a positive 2y is a negative 3y minus 3 equal. When I combine these, I get 0, because those are additive inverses, those are opposites, and I get negative 3. All right, so then, again, what I did here to go from here to here was I combined like terms. All right, so now I'm going to use the addition property of equality again, because I'm trying to get this term by itself. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and so I'm combine like terms. So that, again, that's the addition property of equality. Addition property of equality. And then I combine like terms. These are opposites, so their sum is 0. So I get negative 3y equal, and a negative 3 and a positive 3 is 0. So again, that was the combine like terms. And then to get the variable y by itself, I'm going to, right now, multiply by negative 3. So the opposite is to divide by negative 3. So that's a multiplication property of equality. And so negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1. 1 times y is y. And 0 divided by negative 3 is 0. And so your solution is 0. And so all I did here was simplify, reduce. Okay? All right, so that's number 2. All right, number 3, let's suppose you had, number 3, suppose you had 8 minus 3 times 2x minus 1. Let's make it minus 3 equal x plus 5. Okay? Alright, so again, I have parentheses. I don't see any fractions, so I don't need to clear the fractions. But I do have parentheses. I'm using distributive property. Now you got to be a little bit careful. Don't make the mistake and say 8 minus 3 is 5 and distribute the 5. Okay, so remember the order of operations. See how when you read this, you're saying 8 subtract 3 times 2x minus 3. So that's multiplication, that's subtraction. You've got to do multiplication before you do subtraction. All right, so remember the order of operations. So that's why you can do distributive property first. So you can distribute the negative 3. So I get 8, a negative 3 times 2x is a negative 6x. A negative 3 times a negative 9, 3 times a negative 3 is a positive 9 equal x plus 5. All right, and then combine like terms. So remember, all I did here was a distributive property. Okay, so now you can combine like terms. So 8 plus 9 is 17. So I get negative 6x plus 17 equal x plus 5. All right, so now, again, I have variables on both sides, constants on both sides, so let's deal with the variables first. So, and let's just bring the variables to the left. So, I'm going to subtract x from both sides, so that's the addition property of equality, and then I can combine like terms. A negative 6x and a negative 1x is a negative 7x plus 17 equal x and a negative x is 0. Those are opposites. Those are additive inverses. And 0 plus 5 is 5. All right, and then notice I have the variable on one side, but you're going to deal with this coefficient last. You're going to use the multiplication property of equality last. So right now I'm adding 17. The opposite is to subtract 17. So that's the addition property of equality. Now you can combine like terms. 17 and negative 17 is 0. So you're left with negative 7x equal, and then 5 and a negative 17 is a negative 12. And then you're going to use the multiplication property of equality, so you can divide both sides by negative 7, and then reduce and simplify, so you get Negative 7 divided by negative 7 is 1. 1 times x is x. And then a negative divided by negative is a positive, so you get 12 sevenths. So that's your solution there. Okay. Let's see. There's another one we can do. All right, let's do one more. So let's say we had this problem. All right, so negative, and then parentheses 3x minus 5, or you can read it as the opposite of 3x minus 5, same thing, minus 4 equal negative 2 times 3x plus 1. Alright, so I have parentheses on both sides, so I have two sets of parentheses. I'm going to use the distributive property twice. Now, remember though, see this number right here? That's understood to be a 1, so this will be a negative 1. So if you need to rewrite it, you rewrite it. So just write it like this. Alright, so all I did was I just rewrote this equation into this equivalent equation with this coefficient actually showing to be a negative 1. So then you can distribute a negative 1, and over here you can distribute a negative 2. So negative 1 times 3x is a negative 3x, a negative 1 times a negative 5 is a positive 5, and then minus 4, equal, and then over here, a negative 2 times 3x is a negative 6x, and the negative 2 times a positive 1 is a negative 2. All right, so that was the distributive property. Now the next step is to combine like terms. So I can combine these constants, so I get negative 3x, a positive 5, and a negative 4 is a positive 1, equal, and then these two are not alike, so I'm just going to rewrite it. Okay, so now I'm going to bring the variables to one side, constant to the other. So let's bring the variables to the left. Again, it does not matter whether you bring to the left or the right, it does not matter. So to bring the variables to the left, I'm going to have to add 6x to both sides. And so I'm going to add 6x, and then remember that's the addition property of equality. And so once I do the addition property of equality, I can combine like terms. So a negative 6x and a positive 6x is 0. A negative 3x and a positive 6x is a positive 3x. So that becomes 3x plus 1 equal, and then 0 and a negative 2 is a negative 2. Right. And then next I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So that's the addition property of equality again. Then you can combine like terms. A positive 1 and negative 1 is 0. So 3x equal, and then negative 2 and a negative 1 is a negative 3. And then now, remember you got to get the variable x by itself. So right now I'm multiplying by 3. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. Remember that's the multiplication property of equality. That's what I'm using. So I always use that last. And then 3 divided by 3 is 1. 1 times x is x. And then negative 3 divided by positive 3 is a negative 1. So all I did here was simplify, reduce. All right, so there's your solution. So your solution is negative 1. Okay, so notice what I did here to go from here to here was I used a distributive property. Once you use a distributive property, we combine like terms. That's how I got this step. And then when I added 6x to both sides, that's the addition property of equality. And once you do the addition property of equality, to get to that point, you can combine like terms. So notice the pattern as you go through all these. Then the next step is to use the addition property of equality again. And then to get to this point, I combine like terms. Okay? All right. So that should take care of this part of the lesson.